They refused the blind elder a drink, but before the next sunrise, 200 warriors would stand guard for the man who showed him kindness. The wind drifted through the dusty street of Dry Creek, carrying the scent of leather, sun-baked wood, and the faint bitterness of spilled whiskey. Samuel Reed sat astride his chestnut horse beneath the shadow of the saloon awning, his hat pulled low against the relentless Arizona sun. Noonlight burned across the sky like molten brass, measuring the world in heat and silence. That was when he saw him. The old man stood alone at the edge of the boardwalk, his weathered hands searching the empty air with careful uncertainty. His eyes were pale and clouded, sightless to the harsh world around him, yet his posture remained dignified, as if he listened to something deeper than sound. A blind Apache elder in a town that had no patience for strangers. The murmurs began before Samuel even moved. "Send him back where he came from," someone muttered. Boots shifted. Doors creaked. No one stepped forward. No one offered water. The elder's fingers tightened around a carved wooden staff, and beneath the worn folds of his buckskin tunic hung a turquoise pendant that shimmered like a fragment of sky fallen to earth. Samuel felt the weight of the moment settle into his chest, heavier than any saddle or rifle he had ever carried. He swung down from his horse, his boots pressing softly into the dust. The town watched in silence. He removed his canteen and placed it gently into the elder's trembling hands. "Easy, sir," Samuel said, his voice calm as a desert breeze. "You're safe now." The old man drank slowly, the water glinting in the sunlight as it touched his lips. When he finished, he lifted his face toward Samuel, as if studying him with unseen eyes. "Kindness travels farther than fear," the elder whispered, his voice worn yet steady, like wind brushing across canyon stone. Samuel offered his arm without hesitation. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Home," the elder replied softly. Together, they stepped off the boardwalk and onto the open trail. The desert stretched before them, endless and golden, rippling beneath the heat like an ocean of light. Each step was measured, deliberate, bound by trust rather than sight. Behind them, the town faded into silence. Hours passed beneath a blazing sun. Dust clung to Samuel's boots, and sweat darkened the brim of his hat, yet he never loosened his grip. He guided the elder across a narrow wash, over jagged stones, and toward the distant line of red mesas rising against the horizon. As twilight settled, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet, they reached the mouth of a quiet canyon. The elder paused, his fingers brushing the turquoise pendant at his chest. He turned his sightless gaze toward Samuel. "You have led a blind man through darkness," he said gently. "The earth remembers such deeds." Samuel offered a faint smile. "Just helping a fellow traveler." The elder inclined his head in gratitude, then stepped forward into the fading light, his silhouette dissolving into the canyon's shadow. Alone once more, Samuel mounted his horse and rode home beneath a sky thick with stars, believing the day's kindness had ended with the setting sun. But long before dawn, as the first pale light brushed the eastern horizon, the distant thunder of hoofbeats began to roll across the valley, steady as a heartbeat and impossible to ignore. The sound reached Samuel Reed before the light did, a low and distant tremor rolling across the desert like thunder trapped beneath the earth. He stirred in the gray hush before dawn, his eyes opening to the quiet rhythm of hoofbeats carried on the cool morning air. For a moment, he lay still, listening. The wind brushed against the wooden walls of his modest ranch house, whispering through the cracks like a warning too gentle to ignore. Samuel rose from his bed and crossed the room, his boots meeting the floorboards with a soft creak. Outside, the world remained suspended between night and sunrise, painted in shades of blue and silver. He pushed open the door and stepped onto the porch, the chill of the desert morning settling against his skin. The eastern horizon glowed faintly, a thin ribbon of gold stretching above the distant mesas. Then he saw them. Shadows moved along the ridgeline nearly half a mile away, dark silhouettes against the pale dawn. One rider, then another, then dozens more emerging in solemn formation. The earth itself seemed to breathe beneath the steady cadence of their approach. Samuel's hand hovered near his holster, not from fear, but from instinct born of years on the frontier. Yet he did not draw. Instead, he stood still, his posture calm, his gaze unwavering. The riders advanced in silence, their presence commanding yet measured, their movements as fluid as the wind over open plains. Feathers stirred gently in the morning breeze, and the faint scent of sage drifted across the valley. As the sun crested the horizon, its first rays spilled across the land, revealing them in full. 200 Apache warriors formed a wide circle around his ranch, their horses standing proud and still. Their painted faces were solemn, their bows lowered in peace, their eyes reflecting neither anger nor threat. Only purpose. Samuel exhaled slowly, the golden light warming his face. He recognized the dignity in their silence, the discipline in their stillness. This was no war party. It was something older, something sacred. The riders halted as one, their formation precise, their arrival deliberate. Dust settled around them in a quiet halo, glowing beneath the rising sun. Not a single weapon was raised. Not a single word was spoken. From the center of the formation, one figure rode forward with measured grace. The horse moved steadily across the open ground, its hooves barely disturbing the earth. As the rider drew closer, Samuel's breath caught in quiet recognition. The blind elder sat tall in the saddle, his sightless eyes lifted toward the dawn. The turquoise pendant rested against his chest, shining like a piece of the morning sky. He guided his horse with effortless certainty, as if the land itself whispered directions to his spirit. When he reached the foot of the porch, he dismounted with calm assurance. A young warrior stepped forward to steady him, but the elder raised a gentle hand, declining assistance. He needed none. Samuel stepped down from the porch to meet him, the dust shifting beneath his boots. For a moment, neither man spoke. The silence between them carried the weight of gratitude, deeper than words and older than memory. The elder inclined his head with quiet reverence. "You led me through darkness," he said softly, his voice as steady as canyon stone. "And so, by the laws of my people, you shall never stand alone." At his signal, the warriors dismounted as one, placing their hands over their hearts. The valley fell into a sacred stillness, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Samuel's eyes moved. Across the horizon, taking in the sight before him, 200 guardians stood in silent honor around his humble ranch, their presence not as conquerors, but as protectors. The elder reached into his tunic and gently removed the turquoise pendant. He placed it into Samuel's open palm, its cool surface glowing with the warmth of the rising sun. "This stone carries the memory of your kindness," he said. "Keep it close, and our people will remember you as a friend." Samuel closed his fingers around the pendant, feeling its quiet weight settle into his hand. As the first full light of morning washed across the valley, he realized that a single act of compassion had reshaped his destiny, and the day had only just begun. The turquoise pendant rested in Samuel Reed's palm long after the elder's words faded into the morning air, its cool surface warming slowly beneath the rising sun as though it carried a quiet pulse of its own. Around him, 200 Apache warriors remained still as carved stone, their presence solemn and unwavering, forming a silent ring that stretched across the golden valley. The wind drifted through the open plains, lifting strands of dust that shimmered in the light like drifting embers. Samuel closed his fingers around the pendant and felt something shift within him, not fear, but recognition, as though a door he had never known existed had gently opened. He lifted his gaze to the blind elder, whose sightless eyes seemed fixed upon a horizon far beyond what any man could see. "I am called White Hawk," the elder said softly, his voice steady as ancient earth. "Among my people, a man who guides another through darkness becomes a brother of the spirit. Today, you stand as such a man." Samuel inclined his head in quiet respect. "My name is Samuel Reed," he replied, "and I only did what any decent soul should." A faint smile touched the elder's weathered face. "Few do," White Hawk answered gently. Behind him, the warriors remained silent, their horses calm beneath the morning sun. Feathers stirred in the breeze, and the faint scent of sage drifted across the land. In the distance, the low mesas glowed red and amber, their shadows stretching long across the desert floor. Samuel glanced toward the horizon where the small town of Dry Creek rested barely 2 miles away, its wooden buildings now stirring with uneasy curiosity. Already, figures gathered along the ridge, watching the scene unfold with cautious wonder. Rumors would travel faster than the wind, carried by whispers and fear alike. He knew what the townsfolk would say, that he had invited danger to his doorstep, that kindness toward strangers came with a price. Yet as he stood before White Hawk and the silent guardians who surrounded his ranch, Samuel felt no regret, only a quiet certainty. The elder extended his hand, placing it gently over Samuel's. "This pendant is more than stone," White Hawk said. "It is a promise. As long as you carry it, our people will remember your mercy, and the path between us shall remain open." Samuel nodded, the weight of the turquoise settling against his palm like a sacred trust. He slipped the pendant into the pocket over his heart, feeling its presence steady his breath. "You honor me," he said quietly. A young warrior stepped forward, offering the reins of the elder's horse, but White Hawk remained still, listening to the whisper of the wind. "The world is changing," the elder continued, his voice thoughtful. "Storms gather beyond these hills, though the sky appears clear. When that day comes, remember that you are not alone." Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing meaning beneath the words. "If ever you need a friend," he replied, "you will find one here." White Hawk inclined his head once more, gratitude etched into the lines of his face. He raised his hand gently, and at the silent signal, the warriors mounted their horses in perfect unison. The sound of leather and hooves moved like a soft tide across the valley. Slowly, with measured dignity, they turned toward the distant canyon. Sunlight danced along their path as they rode away, their figures fading into the shimmering heat of the desert. Within moments, the valley returned to stillness, leaving only the whisper of the wind and the faint imprint of hoofprints in the dust. Samuel remained on his porch, watching until the last silhouette disappeared beyond the red mesas. He reached into his pocket and touched the turquoise pendant once more, its smooth surface warm against his fingers. The desert stretched before him, vast and silent, holding secrets older than memory. And though the day had only just begun, Samuel Reed understood that his simple act of kindness had set something far greater into motion, something that would soon return to his doorstep with the turning of fate. By noon, the valley looked as though nothing unusual had ever touched it, yet the silence carried a weight Samuel Reed could not ignore. The sun climbed high above the Arizona sky, spilling heat across the open plains and bleaching the earth in shades of gold and amber. Cicadas hummed in the dry grass, and a slow wind rolled dust across the distant trail where the Apache riders had vanished hours before. Samuel leaned against the wooden fence outside his ranch, the turquoise pendant resting warm against his chest beneath his shirt. Its presence felt steady and grounding, like a quiet promise whispered by the land itself. He watched the horizon with thoughtful eyes, replaying the morning's events in his mind, still uncertain whether he had witnessed a dream or a turning point written by fate. Before long, the distant sound of wagon wheels creaking over packed earth drifted toward him. A small group of townsfolk from Dry Creek approached cautiously, their horses moving at a hesitant pace. At their head rode Sheriff Thomas Grady, his silver badge glinting in the sunlight. Beside him, the saloon keeper, Martin Doyle, squinted against the glare, his expression caught between suspicion and reluctant curiosity. They reined in nearly 20 yards from the ranch, careful not to trespass further. "Samuel," the sheriff called out, his voice measured. "We saw them from the ridge. 200 riders. Is it true?" Samuel nodded slowly, his gaze calm. "They came in peace," he replied. "And they left the same way." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Doyle removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "Peace does not usually arrive with that many horses," he muttered. Samuel offered a faint, knowing smile. "Neither does gratitude," he said quietly. The words lingered in the warm air, settling over the group like dust after a passing storm. Sheriff Grady studied Samuel's face, searching for signs of deception, but found none. His stern expression softened. "You did a brave thing," he admitted. "Most men would have turned away." Samuel shrugged gently. "Sometimes doing right is the only choice a man has left." A hush followed, broken only by the whisper of the wind. The sheriff tipped his hat in respect before turning his horse back toward town. One by one, the others followed, their suspicion fading into thoughtful silence as they rode away. When the last rider disappeared over the rise, Samuel remained alone once more beneath the vast desert sky. He reached into his shirt and drew out the turquoise pendant, its blue surface catching the sunlight with a quiet glow. As he turned it in his fingers, he noticed faint etchings along its silver edge, markings too precise to be random. He traced them carefully, realizing they formed a pattern, a map etched in delicate lines that curved like a winding canyon trail. His breath slowed. The design pointed toward the red mesas beyond the eastern horizon, a place where the earth rose like a fortress of stone. Samuel studied the markings in silence, sensing that the pendant held more than memory. It carried direction, purpose, a message meant for him alone. The wind stirred again, lifting the hem of his coat as though urging him forward. In the distance, a hawk circled high above the glowing cliffs, its cry echoing across the empty plains. Samuel closed his fingers around the pendant, feeling its quiet warmth settle into his palm. He gazed toward the far-off mesas, where sunlight shimmered against the scarlet rock like a beacon calling him home. And as the endless horizon stretched before him, Samuel Reed understood that his simple act of kindness had not ended with gratitude. It had begun a journey, one that would soon lead him into the heart of a destiny written long before his footsteps ever touched the dust. The desert held its breath as the sun dipped low behind the scarlet mesas, painting the sky in hues of amber and fading gold. Samuel Reed stood on the porch of his ranch, the turquoise pendant resting in his palm, its surface glowing softly in the twilight. The etched markings along its silver edge caught the last light of day, forming delicate lines that curved like a hidden trail through ancient stone. He traced them once more, his fingers steady, his mind turning with quiet certainty. Whatever path the pendant revealed, it had not found him by chance. The wind stirred across the open plains, carrying the scent of dry sage and distant rain, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a lone hawk cried into the evening sky. Samuel slipped the pendant back beneath his shirt, feeling its warmth settle against his heart like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The ranch lay silent behind him, its fences stretching across the land in long, familiar lines, each post weathered by years of sun and solitude. For a moment, he hesitated. This place had been his refuge, a quiet corner of the world where nothing unexpected ever lingered. But the memory of White Hawk's voice returned to him, calm and certain as canyon stone. The world is changing. Storms gather beyond these hills. Samuel exhaled slowly, the weight of those words pressing gently upon his spirit. He stepped down from the porch and crossed the dusty yard toward the barn, where his chestnut horse waited in the dim glow of lantern light. The animal lifted its head with a soft nicker, sensing purpose in its master's movements. Samuel brushed its mane with steady hands and secured the saddle with practiced ease. Leather creaked softly, and the faint scent of hay mingled with the cooling night air. He packed a canteen, a bedroll, and enough provisions for several days, measuring each item with quiet deliberation. There was no urgency in his actions, only resolve. Outside, the first stars began to pierce the darkening sky, scattered like silver dust across the heavens. By the time he led the horse into the open, the desert had transformed into a vast sea of shadows and starlight. A lantern flickered inside the ranch house, casting a warm glow through the window, but Samuel did not turn back. He mounted the saddle and guided the horse toward the eastern horizon, where the distant mesas rose like ancient sentinels against the night. The path ahead was silent, yet it called to him with a quiet authority he could not ignore. As he rode, the pendant rested against his chest, its steady warmth a reminder that kindness had forged a bond stronger than fear. The moon climbed slowly above the ridgeline, illuminating the desert floor in pale silver. Each hoofbeat echoed softly across the land, marking the beginning of a journey that felt both unfamiliar and destined. Hours passed beneath the endless sky, and with every mile, Samuel felt the weight of solitude give way to something deeper. Purpose. Somewhere beyond those red cliffs lay answers waiting to be discovered, truths etched into stone long before he was born. Near midnight, he paused atop a low ridge and gazed toward the distant mesas, their silhouettes glowing faintly beneath the moonlight. He drew the pendant from beneath his shirt and held it up to the stars. The turquoise shimmered with an inner light, its markings aligning perfectly with the outline of the canyon ahead. Samuel's breath slowed as understanding settled over him like the cool desert wind. This was no mere token of gratitude. It was a guide, a summons. He closed his fingers around the stone and whispered into the stillness, "I am coming." The wind carried his words into the vast night, and somewhere in the distance, a faint drumbeat echoed across the desert, soft as a heartbeat and filled with promise. With quiet determination, Samuel turned his horse toward the glowing horizon and rode onward, unaware that the path before him would not only shape his destiny, but unite two worlds bound by honor, trust, and the enduring power of a single act of compassion. The desert night stretched wide and endless before Samuel Reed, a sea of silver light beneath the watchful gaze of a billion stars. The rhythmic sound of hooves pressed softly into the sand as his horse carried him eastward, guided by instinct and the quiet warmth of the turquoise pendant resting against his chest. A cool breeze drifted across the open plains, carrying the scent of sage and distant stone, whispering secrets older than memory. Hours passed in silence, the moon tracing its slow arc across the sky, until the first pale hint of dawn touched the horizon. The red mesas rose ahead like ancient sentinels, their towering silhouettes glowing faintly in shades of indigo and ash. Samuel reined in atop a gentle ridge nearly 3 miles from the canyon entrance, allowing his horse a moment of rest. The animal exhaled softly, its breath curling in the cool morning air as the world waited for the sun to rise. He removed his hat and wiped the dust from his brow, his gaze fixed on the vast expanse before him. As the eastern sky brightened, the pendant stirred with a subtle warmth against his heart. Samuel drew it from beneath his shirt and held it toward the growing light. The turquoise stone shimmered, its etched markings aligning with the canyon below, forming a path as precise as a compass drawn by unseen hands. He felt no fear, only a deep and steady certainty. The land itself seemed to recognize the symbol he carried. As dawn broke, the desert awakened in hues of gold and crimson. Shadows retreated across the sand, revealing a winding trail leading into the heart of the canyon. Samuel guided his horse forward, descending slowly over the rocky slope. Each step echoed softly against the stone, accompanied by the distant cry of a hawk circling high above. The air grew cooler within the canyon walls, scented with mineral earth and wild sage. Sunlight filtered through narrow openings overhead, painting shifting patterns across the ground like sacred script. After nearly an hour, the passage widened into a hidden valley sheltered by towering cliffs. There, beside a clear spring that shimmered like glass, stood a small encampment. Smoke curled gently from a cooking fire, and the soft murmur of voices carried on the breeze. Apache men, women, and children moved with quiet purpose among their lodges, their presence harmonious with the land. As Samuel approached, he slowed his horse and dismounted, keeping his hands visible in a gesture of respect. The pendant glowed faintly in the morning light. A young warrior stepped forward, his expression alert but calm. His eyes settled on the turquoise stone, and recognition softened his gaze. Without a word, he inclined his head and gestured for Samuel to follow. Samuel walked beside him, his boots pressing lightly against the earth, until they reached the center of the encampment. There, seated beside the spring, was White Hawk. The blind elder lifted his head, his sightless eyes reflecting the sunlight as though he could see beyond it. A gentle smile touched his face. "You have come," he said softly. Samuel bowed his head in greeting. "Your pendant showed me the way," he replied. White Hawk nodded, his voice calm as flowing water. "It did not guide you," he said. "It revealed the path that was already within your heart." Around them, the tribe gathered in respectful silence, their expressions filled with quiet curiosity. The morning sun illuminated the valley, casting a golden glow upon the cliffs and the clear spring at its center. Samuel felt the weight of their attention, not as a burden, but as an honor. He realized that he had not merely crossed miles of desert. He had crossed a boundary between worlds. And as the wind stirred through the canyon, carrying the promise of a new day, Samuel Reed understood that his journey had led him not to strangers, but to lives bound by trust, destiny, and the enduring power of compassion. The morning sun rose gently over the hidden valley, spilling ribbons of gold across the canyon walls and turning the clear spring into a mirror of liquid light. Samuel Reed stood quietly beside White Hawk, feeling the stillness of the encampment settle around him like a sacred hush. The air carried the faint scent of cedar smoke and wild sage, and the distant laughter of children drifted softly through the breeze. It was a peaceful sound, one that spoke of trust rather than suspicion. The turquoise pendant rested against his chest, warm and steady, as though it recognized that it had finally returned home. White Hawk lifted his face toward the sunlight, his sightless eyes serene. "You stand among friends," the elder said gently. "Few men cross these lands without fear in their hearts, yet you arrived with none." Samuel inclined his head respectfully. "Fear has its place," he replied, "but it should never silence what is right." A murmur of approval passed quietly through the gathered tribe. Warriors stood with calm dignity, their expressions measured, while elders observed with thoughtful eyes that seemed to weigh more than words. A young girl approached from the edge of the spring, carrying a clay bowl filled with clear water. She offered it to Samuel with both hands. He accepted it with gratitude, bowing his head slightly before taking a sip. The water was cool and pure, tasting of stone and mountain rain. "Thank you," he said softly. The girl smiled shyly before returning to her family. White Hawk gestured toward a flat stone beside him. "Sit," he invited. Samuel lowered himself onto the smooth surface, the warmth of the sun resting lightly upon his shoulders. Around them, the morning unfolded in quiet harmony. Horses grazed near the canyon wall, and women tended small cooking fires, their movements graceful and unhurried. No voices were raised. No weapons were drawn. It was a place guided by balance, shaped by respect for both earth and spirit. "Long before your people built towns," White Hawk began, his voice calm as flowing water, "this valley served as a sanctuary. It is a place where promises are remembered and debts are honored." Samuel listened intently, the elder's words settling into his mind like footprints in soft dust. "Why bring me here?" he asked gently. White Hawk reached out and placed a weathered hand over Samuel's. "Because your kindness did more than guide an old man," he said. "It reminded our people that honor still walks the open plains. The world beyond these cliffs is changing, and many have forgotten how to see one another as brothers. You have not." Samuel felt the weight of those words, not as a burden, but as a quiet calling. "I am no leader," he said humbly, "just a rancher trying to live an honest life." A faint smile touched White Hawk's lips. "The strongest bridges are built by ordinary hands," he replied. "And sometimes, the smallest act carries the greatest power." At his signal, a young warrior stepped forward, carrying a folded blanket woven in patterns of deep red and desert gold. He placed it carefully across Samuel's shoulders. The fabric was warm, its intricate designs telling a story older than memory. "This is given in trust," White Hawk said, "a symbol that you are welcome among us, and that our people stand beside you as allies." Samuel's throat tightened with emotion. He rested his hand over the pendant and inclined his head. "I will honor it," he said quietly. The wind drifted through the canyon, lifting the edges of the woven blanket as sunlight bathed the valley in a gentle glow. In that moment, Samuel Reed understood that he was no longer merely a traveler who had followed a distant call. He had become a bridge between two worlds, bound not by blood, but by compassion and respect. And as the morning light deepened, carrying the promise of days yet to come, he sensed that the journey before him was only just beginning. The sun climbed higher above the canyon, bathing the hidden valley in a warm and steady glow as Samuel Reed adjusted the woven blanket upon his shoulders and gazed across the encampment with quiet reverence. The morning had deepened into midday, and life moved gently around him with a rhythm as ancient as the land itself. Children gathered smooth stones near the spring, their laughter echoing softly against the canyon walls, while elders shared stories in low voices that blended with the whisper of the wind. The scent of cedar smoke drifted through the air, mingling with the sweetness of desert sage. Samuel felt the weight of peace settle. Within him, a calm unlike any he had known on the lonely plains beyond the cliffs. He stood beside White Hawk, who rested comfortably near the water's edge, his sightless gaze lifted toward the sun as though he could feel its light upon his spirit. This valley remembers every promise, the elder said softly. And today, it remembers yours. Samuel bowed his head with quiet humility. I did only what any man should, he replied. White Hawk smiled gently. Yet few do. The elder's words lingered like the echo of distant drums, carrying both gratitude and purpose. A young warrior approached, offering Samuel a simple meal of roasted corn and fresh water. He accepted it with respect, savoring the humble nourishment as he listened to the steady murmur of the tribe. For the first time in years, he felt as though he stood not as a stranger upon foreign soil, but as a welcomed guest among kindred souls. As the sun reached its peak, White Hawk rose slowly with the aid of his carved staff. Though blind, his posture remained proud, and his presence commanded quiet attention. The tribe gathered around him, forming a respectful circle beneath the open sky. Samuel sensed that something meaningful was about to unfold. The wind stirred gently through the canyon, carrying a hush that settled over the assembly. Samuel Reed, White Hawk said, his voice clear and resonant. You crossed the desert guided not by duty, but by compassion. In doing so, you honored not only our people, but the spirit of the land itself. Samuel stepped forward, his boots pressing lightly against the earth. I am honored to stand among you, he replied. White Hawk lifted his hand, and a young woman approached bearing a small wooden box carved with intricate symbols. She placed it into the elder's hands, and he extended it toward Samuel. Within this box, White Hawk explained, rests a token of trust. It is given to those who prove that respect can bridge even the widest divide. Samuel accepted the box with both hands and opened it carefully. Inside lay a slender silver medallion etched with the same markings as the turquoise pendant. The metal gleamed in the sunlight, its design reflecting unity and balance. A quiet murmur of approval passed through the gathered tribe. Carry it as a sign of friendship, White Hawk said. Wherever your path leads, it will remind others that honor lies within your heart. Samuel closed the box gently, his voice steady with gratitude. I will carry it with pride and humility. The wind drifted softly through the valley as the tribe bowed their heads in acknowledgement. Overhead, a hawk soared across the endless blue, its wings catching the sunlight as it circled above the canyon. Samuel followed its flight, sensing that his journey had changed him in ways he could not yet fully understand. As the afternoon light began its slow descent, he felt the quiet certainty that destiny had drawn him here not by chance, but by design. And though he could not foresee what lay beyond the red mesas, he knew that wherever the road led, the bond forged in kindness would guide him forward, uniting two worlds beneath the same boundless sky. The afternoon sun drifted westward, casting long ribbons of amber light across the canyon as Samuel Reed stood at the edge of the hidden valley, the silver medallion resting securely beside the turquoise pendant against his chest. The air was warm yet gentle, carrying the quiet murmur of the spring and the rustle of cottonwood leaves stirred by a soft desert breeze. He gazed across the encampment, committing every detail to memory, from the painted lodges nestled against the canyon walls to the distant silhouettes of children chasing shadows beneath the open sky. Peace lived here, woven into every sound and movement, and Samuel felt its presence settle deep within his heart. White Hawk approached slowly, guided by the steady tap of his carved staff against the earth. Though his eyes could not see the world before him, his expression held a wisdom that seemed to reach far beyond sight. The sun begins its descent, the elder said gently, and with it, the time has come for you to return to your own land. Samuel inclined his head respectfully. I will carry what I have learned here with honor, he replied. White Hawk smiled faintly. You carry more than knowledge, Samuel Reed. You carry trust. That is a burden few men are strong enough to bear. The words settled quietly between them, carried on the wind like a sacred promise. A young warrior led Samuel's horse forward, its chestnut coat glowing beneath the afternoon light. Samuel placed a steady hand along its neck, feeling the warmth of its breath as he prepared for the journey home. Around them, members of the tribe gathered in silent farewell, their expressions calm and dignified. An elder woman pressed a small pouch of dried herbs into Samuel's hands, her gentle smile speaking gratitude without words. He accepted it with a respectful bow, touched by the kindness that mirrored his own. As he secured the pouch to his saddle, White Hawk lifted his face toward the sun. "Remember," the elder said softly, "kindness is a path that never ends. Walk it with courage, and you will never lose your way." Samuel nodded, his voice quiet but resolute. "And should you ever need a friend beyond these cliffs, send for me. My door will always remain open." The wind stirred, carrying his words across the valley as though sealing them in time. He mounted his horse and turned toward the canyon's winding trail. As he rode forward, the tribe stood in silent respect, their figures framed by the towering red cliffs. The setting sun painted the stone in shades of crimson and gold, illuminating the valley like a sacred sanctuary. Samuel paused at the canyon's edge and looked back one final time. White Hawk stood among his people, his presence unwavering, his blind gaze lifted toward the fading light. Though distance separated them, Samuel felt the enduring bond between their worlds, forged not by treaty or obligation, but by compassion freely given. He inclined his head in farewell before guiding his horse onto the open trail. The desert stretched before him, vast and endless beneath a sky of deepening blue. As twilight settled across the land, the first stars appeared, shimmering like distant lanterns guiding his path home. The turquoise pendant rested warmly against his heart, and the silver medallion caught the last rays of sunlight, gleaming with quiet purpose. Samuel Reed rode onward through the fading glow of dusk, knowing that his journey had forever changed him. And as the horizon welcomed the coming night, he understood that the promise born in kindness would echo far beyond the desert, shaping a future where honor, trust, and understanding would unite two worlds beneath the same boundless sky. By the time the first light of dawn brushed the eastern horizon, Samuel Reed had already crossed the last stretch of desert leading back to his ranch. The sky unfolded in soft shades of rose and gold, and the open plains glowed beneath the promise of a new day. A gentle breeze stirred the dry grass, whispering across the land like a quiet greeting. Samuel guided his chestnut horse along the familiar trail, the rhythmic sound of hooves echoing softly in the stillness. The turquoise pendant rested against his chest, warm and steady, while the silver medallion caught the morning light with a muted gleam. As his ranch came into view, its weathered fences stretching across nearly 200 acres of sunlit earth, he felt a sense of belonging settle within him. The wooden porch stood exactly as he had left it, humble and steadfast beneath the wide Arizona sky. Yet something felt different. Not changed, but awakened. As he approached the gate, he noticed figures gathered along the distant ridge. Townsfolk from Dry Creek had come to watch, their silhouettes outlined against the rising sun. Word had traveled quickly, carried on whispers and speculation. Sheriff Thomas Grady stood among them, his silver badge glinting faintly, while Martin Doyle shaded his eyes beneath his hat. They did not cross the boundary of Samuel's land. Instead, they waited in respectful silence. Samuel reined in his horse near the porch and dismounted slowly, dust curling around his boots. He removed his hat and nodded toward the observers. Sheriff Grady tipped his own hat in return. "You have been gone 3 days," he called across the distance. "We wondered if you would return." Samuel offered a calm smile. "The desert has a way of guiding a man home," he replied. The sheriff studied him for a moment before speaking again. "Is it true what they say, that you were welcomed among them?" Samuel rested his hand over his heart, where the pendant lay. "It is true," he answered simply. A hush fell over the ridge. The townsfolk exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from suspicion to quiet contemplation. Martin Doyle cleared his throat. "And they let you leave unharmed?" he asked cautiously. Samuel's gaze remained steady. "They treated me with honor," he said. "As I treated them." The words drifted across the sunlit valley, settling into the air with quiet authority. Sheriff Grady removed his hat once more, this time in respect. "Perhaps we have misjudged more than we understood," he admitted. Samuel inclined his head, offering neither pride nor reproach. "Understanding begins with a single step," he said gently. The sheriff nodded, his expression thoughtful, before turning his horse back toward Dry Creek. One by one, the others followed, leaving the ranch in peaceful solitude once again. As their figures disappeared beyond the ridge, Samuel stepped onto his porch and gazed across the vast horizon. The morning sun rose higher, casting long rays of gold over the plains. He drew the turquoise pendant from beneath his shirt, letting it rest in his palm. Its surface shimmered with quiet brilliance, a reminder of promises forged beyond the red mesas. He then opened the small wooden box and lifted the silver medallion, its etched symbols catching the light like a silent oath. Together, they gleamed as emblems of trust. Samuel placed them gently upon the wooden rail, watching as the sunlight illuminated their designs. In that moment, the desert felt less like a frontier and more like a bridge between worlds. The wind carried the distant cry of a hawk overhead, its wings gliding effortlessly across the boundless sky. Samuel Reed replaced the medallion against his chest and rested his hands upon the porch railing. He looked toward the horizon with calm certainty, knowing that his life had been forever changed by a single act of compassion. And as the morning light stretched across the endless plains, he understood that true honor did not lie in conquest or fear, but in the courage to extend kindness where none was expected, allowing understanding to rise like the sun over a once divided land. The days that followed returned to a quiet rhythm, yet nothing felt quite the same beneath the endless Arizona sky. Samuel Reed rose each morning with the sun, tending to his horses, repairing fence posts, and walking the boundaries of his 200-acre ranch as he had done countless times before. The desert stretched wide and familiar around him, painted in shades of gold and copper beneath the gentle warmth of dawn. But now, with the turquoise pendant resting against his chest and the silver medallion gleaming softly in his pocket, every breeze seemed to carry a deeper meaning. The land no longer felt lonely. It felt connected. One afternoon, as the sun drifted westward and shadows lengthened across the plains, Samuel paused near the crest of a low hill overlooking the Dry Creek Trail. A distant glimmer caught his eye. At first, he thought it was merely sunlight dancing upon the horizon. Then he heard it, the soft, measured rhythm of hoofbeats carried on the wind. He shaded his eyes and gazed toward the distance. A small group of riders approached at an unhurried pace, their figures outlined by the golden haze of late afternoon. Samuel watched in silence, his posture calm and unguarded. As the riders drew nearer, he recognized the painted patterns on their garments and the quiet dignity in their bearing. Apache warriors. They halted at the edge of his land, no closer than 50 yards from his fence, their presence respectful and deliberate. At their center stood a young warrior holding a staff adorned with eagle feathers. He dismounted slowly and approached the gate, his steps measured and composed. Samuel met him halfway, offering a courteous nod. The warrior inclined his head in return before speaking in careful English. "Samuel Reed, bearer of the turquoise stone, I bring words from White Hawk." The wind stirred gently, lifting the dust between them as Samuel listened. "You are welcome here," Samuel replied. "Speak freely." The young warrior extended a small leather pouch, its surface decorated with intricate beadwork. "The elder sends his gratitude," he said. "The bond between our people has been strengthened. The path between Dry Creek and the canyon will remain open in peace, as long as honor guides those who walk it." Samuel accepted the pouch with both hands, feeling its weight settle into his palms like a promise fulfilled. Inside lay a strip of parchment marked with symbols and a simple translation etched in English. A message of goodwill, a sign of trust. He looked up, his expression warm with sincerity. "Tell White Hawk that his friendship is returned with respect," Samuel said. "My home will always stand open to him and his people." The warrior smiled faintly, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Your words will be carried to him with honor." He stepped back, mounted his horse, and raised his hand in silent farewell. The other riders followed, turning toward the horizon as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Samuel remained by the gate, watching as their silhouettes faded into the glowing distance. The wind whispered softly through the tall grass, carrying with it the quiet assurance of peace. He opened the pouch once more, tracing the careful markings with his fingers. It was more than a message. It was proof that understanding had taken root where suspicion once stood. As twilight painted the desert in hues of violet and amber, Samuel returned to his porch and gazed across the endless plains. The turquoise pendant shimmered in the fading light, and the silver medallion reflected the last glow of the setting sun. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the calm evening air. Out here, beyond the noise of the world, justice did not need words. It only needed a man brave enough to choose compassion over fear. And as the first stars emerged in the deepening sky, Samuel Reed understood that the legacy of a single act of kindness would endure far beyond the horizon, guiding generations toward a future shaped not by division, but by honor, trust, and the quiet strength of the human heart. Autumn arrived quietly across the Arizona plains, brushing the desert with cooler winds and skies of endless blue. The harsh heat of summer softened into golden afternoons, and Samuel Reed's ranch stood peaceful beneath the changing light. Cottonwood leaves shimmered along the dry creek bed, their pale gold fluttering like whispers of time itself. Samuel worked as he always had, mending fences, tending his horses, and watching the horizon with steady eyes. Yet each day carried a deeper sense of purpose, as though the land itself had taken notice of the bond forged beyond the red mesas. The turquoise pendant rested against his chest, and the silver medallion remained close to his heart, both gleaming softly in the desert sun. Word of the quiet alliance spread gradually through Dry Creek. Suspicion gave way to curiosity, and curiosity to respect. Traders began to travel the trail between the town and the distant canyon, exchanging blankets, tools, and stories under open skies. Sheriff Thomas Grady often paused at Samuel's ranch, tipping his hat in greeting and sharing news carried on the wind. "You changed something out here," the sheriff said one afternoon, his voice thoughtful as he watched the sun dip low over the plains. Samuel leaned against the porch rail, his gaze steady. "I did not change it," he replied. "I simply chose not to stand in its way." The sheriff nodded slowly, as though understanding a truth he had never spoken aloud. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, until the desert itself seemed to settle into a newfound harmony. Then, one crisp morning, as dawn painted the sky in soft shades of rose and amber, a distant line of riders appeared along the eastern ridge. Samuel recognized them instantly. Apache warriors approached at a measured pace, their silhouettes framed by the rising sun. But this time, they did not come in silence alone. At their head rode White Hawk, guided by a young warrior, yet sitting tall with unwavering dignity. Samuel stepped forward from his porch as they halted before the gate. Removing his hat, he inclined his head with quiet respect. White Hawk dismounted slowly, his carved staff tapping gently against the earth. "Samuel Reed," he said, his voice calm as the desert wind. "I have come not as a guest, but as a friend." Samuel smiled warmly. "Then you honor my home," he replied. "You are always welcome here." The elder lifted his face toward the morning sun. "Our people remember what you have done," he said. "Because of your kindness, a path of peace has opened between our worlds. Trade flows where fear once stood, and trust walks where suspicion once lingered." He paused, allowing the words to settle like dew upon the land. "Today, we return not to repay a debt, but to celebrate a bond." At his signal, the warriors dismounted, forming a respectful circle around the ranch. They carried no weapons raised in warning, only gifts of woven blankets, carved tools, and baskets filled with desert herbs. The wind drifted gently across the plains, carrying the scent of sage and the quiet promise of unity. Samuel accepted the offerings with humility, his heart steady with gratitude. "This land is wide enough for all who walk it with honor," he said softly. White Hawk nodded, a faint smile touching his weathered face. "And so it shall remain." As the sun climbed higher, casting its warm glow across the ranch, the two men stood side by side, gazing out over the endless desert. In that silent moment, words were no longer needed. The horizon stretched before them, boundless and bright, a testament to what compassion could achieve. And beneath the vast Arizona sky, Samuel Reed understood that a single act of kindness had not merely changed a life. It had changed a future, uniting two peoples through trust, respect, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Winter arrived gently upon the Arizona plains, not with snow, but with a quiet hush carried on crisp desert winds and skies of endless crystal blue. The sun rose low and golden above the horizon, casting long ribbons of light across Samuel Reed's ranch, where frost traced delicate patterns along the wooden fence posts like silver lace. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney of his small ranch house, curling into the still morning air as the land settled into a season of reflection. Samuel stood upon his porch, his weathered hands resting upon the railing, his gaze fixed upon the distant mesas glowing faintly beneath the pale winter sun. The turquoise pendant lay warm against his chest, and the silver medallion shimmered softly in the light, reminders of a promise forged not by force, but by compassion. The desert stretched endlessly before him, vast and serene, its silence carrying the quiet dignity of time itself. Months had passed since the day White Hawk stood upon this very ground, yet the bond between their worlds had only grown stronger. Traders moved freely along the open trail, exchanging goods beneath the watchful gaze of the red cliffs, and the people of Dry Creek had learned to greet their neighbors with respect rather than suspicion. Where fear once lingered, understanding now walked unchallenged. Samuel watched as a lone hawk glided across the boundless sky, its wings steady against the wind, a silent guardian of the frontier. He reached into his coat and drew out the turquoise pendant, turning it gently in his palm as sunlight danced across its surface. Its etched markings glowed faintly, reflecting the promise that kindness, once given, never truly fades. Behind him, the door creaked softly as Sheriff Thomas Grady stepped onto the porch, removing his hat with a respectful nod. "Morning, Samuel," he said. "Dry Creek has never known a quieter winter." Samuel offered a faint smile. Peace has a way of finding those who welcome it. The sheriff glanced toward the distant horizon, his expression thoughtful. "It began with you," he said. "One man, one act, and the courage to see beyond fear." Samuel shook his head gently. "It began with a choice," he replied. "A simple decision to help another soul in need." The sheriff nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. After a moment, he tipped his hat and returned to his horse, leaving Samuel alone once more beneath the vast expanse of sky. The wind stirred softly through the open plains, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. As the sun climbed higher, its golden light illuminated the land like a blessing. Samuel slipped the pendant back beneath his shirt and rested his hands upon the railing, his heart steady with quiet certainty. Far beyond the red mesas, he knew White Hawk and his people walked their own paths beneath the same endless heavens, guided by honor and bound by trust. Though miles separated them, their spirits remained united by a bond that neither distance nor time could break. A faint echo of hoofbeats drifted across the wind, not as a warning, but as a reminder that friendship endured. Samuel Reed stood tall against the winter light, his silhouette framed by the wide Arizona sky, a man forever changed by the power of compassion. Out here, where the desert met the horizon, justice did not need the sound of gunfire. It lived quietly in the courage to do what was right. And as the sun rose over the silent plains, Samuel understood that the greatest legacy a man could leave behind was not written in conquest, but in kindness. The land remembered, the people remembered, and beneath the boundless sky of the American West, the story of a single act of mercy would endure, carried on the wind for generations yet to come.